Tensei, Nitsigosen, Kiesko, Chagos Isko, Utsinia, Amaskasi, Waskaigan. Hello, I'm Daystar. My English name is Lindsay Belcourt. I come from Edmonton in Alberta, Canada, and I'm here to tell you a bit about myself and how I decided to pursue entrepreneurship as a two-spirit indigenous person. So my family on my mom's side is from Urbanskin First Nation. That is where my kokum was born. And my mom's dad is from Saddle Lake First Nation. And on my dad's side, we are Métis from Lake St. Anne. I grew up in Alberta and in Edmonton. So a lot of my life growing up was an urban kid, and my parents had their own fur business. And so I was born into, I guess you could call it like Indigenous economics, and how that was passed down on my dad's side of the family. The original business was my grandpa. I actually never met him, but it started out as Belcourt Furs. And then all of my uncles, and including my dad, they all basically got all of the teachings and the knowledge and the networks through my grandfather. And then so my parents had their own fur business. This all started before I was born. And then unfortunately, when it comes to being an Indigenous family, in the colonial state in so-called Canada, some of the realities for us is that they don't like to see successful Indigenous people. And so there was an unfortunate event where my parents' business basically got taken out by Fish and Wildlife. And my parents had to spend most of their time and their energy going to courts and fighting for their livelihood and their business, which in turn, they went bankrupt. And we had to move from our home, which was outside of Edmonton, into the city. It's really interesting because I have older siblings that grew up with the business side of our family, and I came later on in life. And so I grew up with my parents that basically had their livelihood taken away and living in poverty. And so we moved to Edmonton. My parents had to go on welfare and basically struggle and survive the best ways that they could. So that was basically an introduction into, I guess, the struggle of what it means to be an Indigenous person within the business sector. And at that time, that would have been the 80s, there wasn't a lot of support. And so I watched my parents, with their own mental illness that was never really addressed. And I watched them struggle. But they were always encouraging for myself and my siblings to pursue things that mattered to us as individuals and as Indigenous people. That no matter what life or the state had thrown at us, we had to keep going. And so fast forward to, I would say I was in my late 20s, going into my early 30s, and I separated from my first marriage. I have always been like a creative person. And so I really, at the time, I was very unsure of my place in the world and really lost. But I knew something inside me was telling me to change direction. And so I decided once I had separated and divorced from my previous marriage that I would move to the west coast of so-called British Columbia, which is the Coast Salish Territories, to really figure out who I was, who I am. And to circle back to my parents growing up, they were bush people and people of the land, and really took pride in gardening. It was a way for them to connect, as well as, I guess it was a certain way for them to work through their mental health and their struggles that was put upon them. And so I grew up around that most of my life. And so when I moved out to the coast, I was like, okay, well, I got to figure out what I'm going to do. And so I started working for other gardening companies and landscaping. And I think the two things that what I'm going to be talking about is I don't have necessarily one particular business. I have two. Whereas when I was on the coast, I wanted to learn more about the gardening industry versus the landscaping. Landscaping is like hardscaping. Gardening is actually tending to the land in urban spaces. And as a person that is not a real technical or mathematical person, I'm very much an artist, true and true. And so for me, the land and being a visual artist actually go hand in hand together. And so that really broadened my confidence and my security into my visual art, the visions that I have inside me. And so the land and the gardens and the landscape and the seascape on the Coast Salish territories became my muse, because in a world that at a societal level doesn't necessarily deem being an artist a job, there's the trope of the starving artist. And so that weighed really heavy on, I'm like, could I really actually make a life out of being an artist? But I needed to eat and have a roof over my head. And so starting my own gardening business facilitated pursuing the arts also. And so the community out there had really uplifted me and supported me, being around other creative people, other creative queers, Indigenous folks, because I think it's important to address that as Indigenous people, we don't think or live the same way as the rest of society does. We speak differently, we think differently, the way we see the world is completely different. And it was a point of where I can honestly say that the ancestors of those lands and those waters really took care of me in a point in my life where my mental health wasn't good. I wasn't sure of where I fit in the world. And it really started in the gardens, and then it made me be able to have confidence in myself within my art. Because my parents were always, and family and friends were like, oh, you're so gifted, you're so talented. And it was like right down till I was a little kid. I would draw a stick person and they'd be like, wow, that is just the most beautiful stick person that I've ever seen. So when you tell a child enough times, they're going to believe in themselves. And so that kind of fostered into being in community and feeling like, yes, I actually do have a gift that I can work on. It's a little challenging for me to describe how ecology and horticulture and visual art go hand in hand for me, but I'm going to do my best. So I've been a fine art oil painter for almost 20 years, and it was just something very random. When I first started, I went into a market and they had some paintbrushes and some paint. And at that time I had, dabbled into acrylics and watercolors, but it wasn't really something that I was drawn to. But wasn't until that I found oil paint that's what basically struck the chord of like, okay, this is a medium that I can work with. Just the way it moves, how slow it is. It takes a long time to dry, and I feel like if you talk to other artists, visual artists, painters, they're like, it's either they love oil paint or they love acrylic. Because acrylic dries really fast and oil takes a long time. And so for me, I like the slow process. And if I made a mistake or I didn't like something that I was painting or creating, I could go over it and correct my mistake. And then as I started to learn more about the medium, I have no post-secondary education around visual art. Most of my post-secondary education is within ecology and horticulture. So within the visual art sector, I had to really figure it out on my own and just play with it, look online, YouTube, and really learn how it works. And once I figured out my own formulas, it really just opened like doors within myself and the visions that I had, which the inspiration is the natural world. There's so much in the land and the landscape and the seascape. There's so many details and so much mystery. And so that gave me vision in what to create. So most of my work, the paintings and tattooing, is about plants, animals, trees, the things that we don't see. And that really, it gave me a sense of like the uniqueness of it, and was a reflection of myself as a person that conventionally didn't fit into a Western society. It was like a mirror for me and a place of spirit and a place that I could actually connect with my spirit. So painting is a form of prayer for me. It's a place of meditation where I could just shut everything else out in the world and connect with the things that I had inside of me and put it out onto a canvas. It's in some aspects, it's like a visual language. Something that I can't explain with my words is something that I can explain within a painting or a drawing or an illustration. And then once, I started to put myself out there, going to different like farmers markets or art markets with community, that's when I started networking and meeting other like-minded artists. And there was a lot of encouragement from friends and communities that suggested you should really take up tattooing. And it's something that I had always wanted to do, but that industry has a whole other can of worms with it. In my own experience, it's a very much like a rock star mentality. There's a lot of ego and a lot of power when it comes to that industry. And so the doors that I was knocking on and trying to walk through, I got a lot of closed doors. And that I had to do things a certain way in order to enter those doors. And I had to really sit and think about what that meant for me. Like, I was sad because it made me feel like I wasn't actually as good as everybody thought I was. But in actuality, it was me not wanting to conform to a very male, patriarchal dominated industry. And so it wasn't until that I could really talk to other, queer, two-spirit, trans folks that basically had to pave the way for people like myself. And it's kind of a learning process individually. And then, through that, there was certain people that actually went through those hardships in those spaces, and took people like myself and started creating safer, braver spaces for people like myself to have a space for us to express our talents and our gifts. And I think that's one of the key components on how I've gotten to where I am today, is community and the support around community, and that there's many ways to do one thing. There isn't just one way to do things. There's so many different ways that you can do things. And the right people and teachers are going to be there for you. When I knew I wanted to start a business was basically when I had spent time with other people like myself and realizing that, you can do it on your own. Just believe in yourself. And that because it's my life, I didn't need to completely sacrifice, or there's a finesse between putting yourself out there and, I guess, marketing. I took a business course, and it was basically a business course around having a niche idea. And so basically when I started putting myself out there as an artist was the same time that I was going to start my own gardening business. In Edmonton at the time, that was 2016, my dad had passed away at that time. And so I was in a lot of grief, and one of my good friends had her own organic gardening business in Edmonton, and I reached out to her and I was like, so would you mind sharing how you started your business? And she was like, well, why don't you come and work with me for a season and I can show you how I did it. And again, it was about having another queer friend that had paved the way and was like, you don't have to cut lawns if you don't want to. You can really tend to the land. And so once I got that, all of that under my belt, I had started my business in Victoria, British Columbia. And it's a small business. I didn't dream of having multiple crews or trucks or anything. It was just me, and I had a good list of clients, and I tended to their gardens and made sure that their soil and their plants and their trees and their shrubs were taken care of in organic gardening. And it's hard to describe, but what it really is about following your intuition and your spirit through it. And so one of the things that my friend had shared with me and through the business class is you don't have to take every client on. You don't have to take every single sale on. You don't have to sell yourself short. And it always goes back to your intuition. If the person, is asking you to be your gardener or even create a painting or a tattoo, if it doesn't feel right, I didn't want to push myself. Like I wanted to listen to myself in that way. And sometimes out of desperation and wanting to get my business going, I did. I worked for people that necessarily didn't align with my values, but I still wanted to get myself out there. And so that was a big thing for me. And I think really what it meant to be an entrepreneur was about changing what that word actually meant through a decolonial lens. That Indigenous people have always connected to other nations, other societies, but they never lost sight of their spirituality around it. And I think that's one of the key components around being a indigiqueer artist entrepreneur, is that when you're a spiritual person, that is us every day that we wake up. There isn't a particular day that is scheduled for prayer. You know, we are our spirit, we are the land, we are our creations. And so that was a big aha moment for me, that I could still stand in my integrity while pursuing business in a capitalistic world that is about hustle culture, cars, big houses, vacations, all of those things to get to the top. And it challenged me to do it differently, do it the way that I wanted to do it. And so really just about starting up was, again, just reaching out to people, networking, and just starting slow and building myself up. It's for me, it's really about taking the time and not rushing, because in a world that is just rush, go, 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 we tend to burn out, and then we're tired, and then the motivation peters out. And so it's really important to take the time to slow down and learn from the mistakes that happen along the way. My favorite part of being an entrepreneur is that I'm in control. And I think I've always struggled with authority most of my life. My parents were they lived a sovereign life, and so that was reflected into my adulthood in that, I mean, of course, all the work that I did, I had supervisors, I had bosses, and I took mental notes of how to not be that type of person, in the sense of the struggles and I guess it's like a hierarchy when you're an entrepreneur or working for other people, is there isn't a lot of room for your own thoughts, your own ideas. And so that made a lot of sense to me on being an entrepreneur, is that I could call the shots. I could decide what work I wanted to do and what work I didn't want to do. And that it allows me to have the time to connect with other people like myself and be in community and travel and connect and network. A lot of it really surrounds itself around how do we as Indigenous people evolve in contemporary times, like our modern day, and how do we stay within our goals. And so being an entrepreneur, that really gives you a lot of space, and it also challenges you to stay focused and figure out how to stay in your responsibilities to community, to your livelihood. And I feel like that's really tricky for people. Is some people really need somebody to tell them, what they need to do in their job every day. They get up at 9, they go to work, and they come home at 5 or whatever. And when it comes to being your own boss, is you have to get up and you have to make sure, you're answering those emails, you're going to those meetings, because there isn't anyone telling you to do those things. You have to tell yourself to do those things. And so I think it's important to be able to challenge ourselves in that way in order to have the life that we want, the life that I wanted, where it doesn't jeopardize family time, friends, ceremony. That's another big aspect for me. Is in other places of work, if it's the summertime or it's harvest season or there is ceremony happening, I would have to ask to go and do those things. And people that are not Indigenous or that are not a part of those communities don't understand the importance of that. And when it comes to our spiritual practices, again, to talk about, like, we wake up every day with our spirit. It's something that doesn't just happen on a Sunday. It's every single day. And as Indigenous people, we know that, there is ceremony happening in 2 days. And in society, you got to give so much notice around when you can take time off from work. And so being an entrepreneur, I can carve those times out and make that a part of my livelihood, because it is. Harvesting medicine, going to ceremony, connecting with other people, that's how our spirits get fulfilled. And so that we can come back to our work and be focused and have our responsibilities met. And so that is extremely important for me as a person, that I can still be a part of that and not have to sacrifice those things. How did I start my business? I just took out a very small loan, really. And I didn't need to have fancy things. Like, I didn't have to have brand new things. Everything that I had started off with was regarding the gardening business. Everything was just very simple, something that I could afford. And then once I had the income coming in, that's when I could upgrade my things. And then as pursuing tattooing, once I had enough income set aside, savings, then I was able to take that money and buy the equipment, high quality equipment, and pursue it in that way. And it wasn't until that I had been on the coast for over a decade, and then I had moved back to Edmonton in the summer of 23, I believe it was, that I started meeting other Indigenous tattoo artists that were a part of the LGBTQIA+. And it was like finding, again, like-minded people that were like, oh, you went through that too? You went through those struggles? And it's really interesting that, prayer does actually work, because these are things that, I was very specific about when it came to my goals that I wanted in life, was to be around people that understood the struggles of that. And so I had a little shop with a friend of mine that I met in Edmonton, and it was our first little two-spirit tattoo studio, and it just felt so good to be around another two-spirit femme, and it wasn't about like competing with each other at all. And I think that is one of my most grateful gifts that I've gotten around networking, is that people that I connect with are not about like who's better than each other. It's really about uplifting each other. And that goes miles when it comes to creativity, when it comes to confidence, skill sharing, techniques, because we all don't know everything. Like we're not born knowing everything. We learn. There was no gatekeeping in the sense of what we brought to the table. It was what we could share together and make our dreams a reality. And so I've been tattooing on and off for a long time, but because of the industry and not having the right spots, it was always an ebb and flow of that practice. And it isn't really until this year that I've started to get that momentum around contemporary tattoos and traditional tattooing, which for me there is a bit of a separation in the sense of traditional tools and then around contemporary machine work. I don't charge money when it comes to traditional markings. I treat it as ceremony, as medicine that we wear on our bodies. And that's not for everybody, but that's just how I've outlined where that fits in being an entrepreneur, is that spirituality can be a part of it. And I think it's extremely important to have it in that way. Our ancestors are with us all the time. And they protect us and they keep us safe. And tattooing is such a intimate and vulnerable space, not only for the people that are getting machine work done or the medicine work done. You are marking somebody's body for the rest of their life, and there is a pain aspect of it. And so that has to be taken in all seriousness. And so again, it's about your style, your values, my values. Somebody asked me, they had a not good experience with one tattoo artist, and it was a mandala art piece, and they're like, "Oh, could you finish this?" And I was like, "No, actually I can't. That's not my style of work. But I hope that you can find somebody to complete your piece." And even though it was an opportunity to tattoo somebody, it wasn't my work to finish, or even my area of what my style is. And so it's really important to look at your art, and if you are wanting to pursue tattooing, is how that your style can reflect within tattoos. And I feel like because the industry is really saturated, it also has broadened the scope of so many different styles. I've seen so many different artworks out there that look like paintings on skin, or even like there's just so many different styles out there that there is. I feel like there is a space or a shop or a community that will fit yours. And if they don't, if there isn't, then that could be an indicator where you could start something new, which is also very exciting.